My name is Ethan, and my journey to becoming a millionaire started in the least likely of places, a small, weathered house on the outskirts of a rundown town. Growing up, life was anything but glamorous. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, and my father had left before I even turned 5. Despite our struggles, I wouldn't say we were destitute. There was always enough for the essentials, food on the table, clothes on my back, and a roof over our heads. But beyond that, luxuries like toys, vacations, or even a new pair of shoes were out of reach. Our house always smelled faintly of damp wood, the floors creaked with every step, and the walls were thin enough to let the cold winds seep in during the winter. Still, it was home. My mom was the glue that held everything together, always telling me to keep my head high no matter what. "Ethan, the world owes you nothing," she'd say, her voice tinged with exhaustion but filled with love. "But if you work hard enough, you can carve out a little piece of it for yourself." School was my escape and my torment. I was an average student, neither outstanding nor particularly troublesome, but my classmates had a knack for making me feel less than enough. They'd snicker at my patched-up clothes or laugh about how I never joined them for after-school activities. I learned early on how to keep to myself, burying my head in books or losing myself in thoughts of a future where I'd never have to feel this way again. But as tough as things were, my mom's unwavering determination became my greatest inspiration. Watching her juggle work and home life made me realize that perseverance wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. If I was ever going to escape the cycle of just getting by, I'd need to fight for it. Little did I know, the seeds for my future were already being planted in those moments of hardship. What I couldn't have imagined then was how an unlikely friendship with an elderly stranger would one day change the course of my life forever. By the time I was 16, I had developed a knack for fixing things. It started with an old radio my mom kept on the kitchen counter. One day, it stopped working, and instead of tossing it out, I took it apart, fiddled with the wires, and brought it back to life. The look on my mom's face when she heard the music playing again was priceless. Word got around the neighborhood about my newfound talent, and soon enough, I was the go-to guy for anything broken: televisions, toasters, even lawnmowers. People would pay me whatever they could afford, which wasn't much, but the satisfaction of solving problems made it worthwhile. Plus, I was earning my own money, and that feeling of independence was addictive. Despite my small victories, the bigger picture loomed over me. College was expensive, and I knew my mom couldn't help with tuition. The only path forward, it seemed, was to scrape together enough scholarships and part-time work to make it happen. So I poured myself into my studies, determined to outwork everyone else. When I wasn't buried in textbooks or fixing gadgets, I was helping my mom around the house. She never let me see how much she was struggling, but I could tell. Her tired eyes, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, it all painted a picture of someone nearing their breaking point. It killed me to see her like that, and I promised myself I'd find a way to give her the life she deserved. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved up enough to cover the first semester at a local community college. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The transition wasn't easy, though. Juggling classes, part-time repair work, and trying to navigate adulthood felt like walking a tightrope. Still, I held on to hope, even when life seemed relentless in its challenges. Little did I know, a chance encounter was waiting just around the corner, one that would take me down a path I never could have predicted. For now, though, all I could do was keep pushing forward, one step at a time. By 21, I was knee-deep in uncertainty. College had drained most of my savings, and while I managed to earn an associate degree, I couldn't afford to continue my education. My part-time repair gigs barely covered rent and groceries, leaving little room to think about bigger dreams. The weight of my circumstances was heavy, but I couldn't allow myself to give up. I'd moved into a small, dingy apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a single room with a kitchenette and a leaky bathroom sink, but it was mine. The rent was cheap because the landlord wasn't the best at keeping things up to code, which meant I spent my evenings patching holes in the walls and fixing the appliances. It felt ironic that I was maintaining someone else's property when I could barely maintain my own life. The repair business was slow and unpredictable. One month, I'd get enough clients to scrape by, and the next, I'd be borrowing money from friends just to pay the bills. I tried advertising my services with handmade flyers pinned to bulletin boards around town, but competition was fierce, and people were hesitant to spend money on repairs when they could just buy something new. The loneliness didn't help. Most of my friends had moved on to bigger things, four-year colleges, steady jobs, relationships. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the same place, spinning my wheels and wondering if I'd ever figure out how to make something of myself. My mom, bless her heart, called me every week to check in and offer words of encouragement, but I could hear the worry in her voice. She wanted me to succeed just as badly as I did, and knowing that only added to the pressure. One night, as I sat in my apartment eating ramen noodles for the third time that week, I caught myself staring at the ceiling, imagining a different life. I pictured myself in a spacious home, free from financial stress, able to give back to my mom and the community that had shaped me. But that dream felt so far away that it almost seemed ridiculous. Still, something inside me refused to let go of that vision. I reminded myself that every successful person I'd ever read about had faced challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. Maybe I was just in the thick of mine. And maybe, just maybe, the opportunity one was waiting for was out there somewhere, waiting for me to find it. I couldn't have known it then, but the path to that opportunity was already unfolding. Within 2 years, my life would change forever, starting with a chance meeting that would redefine everything I thought I knew about success. I was 23 when I met him, Mr. Harper. It happened on one of those days that started like any other, with no hint that it would alter the trajectory of my life. I'd been hired to repair an old grandfather clock in a wealthy neighborhood across town. It was a rare job for me. Most of my clients were people looking for quick fixes for everyday appliances. The house, a sprawling Victorian mansion with ivy creeping up its stone facade, felt like it belonged in a movie. I remember standing on the doorstep, toolbox in hand, hesitating to ring the doorbell. Places like this weren't meant for people like me, or so I thought. When the door opened, I was greeted by a frail yet sharply dressed man in his late 70s. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with a dignity that immediately made an impression. "You must be the repairman," he said, his voice warm but tinged with weariness. "Yes, sir. Ethan. I'm here about the clock," I replied, feeling oddly self-conscious in my worn jeans and scuffed boots. He led me inside, and the house was every bit as grand as I'd imagined. Polished wood floors, antique furniture, and shelves lined with books that smelled of time and wisdom. The clock stood in the corner of the sitting room, an intricate piece of craftsmanship that had clearly seen better days. As I worked, Mr. Harper sat in a leather armchair, watching me with quiet curiosity. We chatted about small things at first, where I learned to repair clocks, how long I'd been in the business. But as the minutes turned into hours, our conversation deepened. He asked about my life, and for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I found myself opening up to him. I told him about my mom, the struggles of making ends meet, and the uncertainty that shadowed my future. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, his eyes betraying a keen understanding of what I was going through. When I finished, he smiled faintly. "You remind me of myself at your age," he said. "Hungry for more, but unsure of where to find it." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded and returned to my work. After I finished repairing the clock, I expected our interaction to end there, but to my surprise, Mr. Harper invited me to stay for tea. I hesitated. I had other clients waiting, but something about his invitation felt important. I accepted, and we spent the next hour talking about his life. He told me he'd been a self-made man, building his fortune through hard work, smart investments, and a bit of luck. But his wealth, he said, had come at a cost: no family, no heirs, and a lingering sense of emptiness. Before I left, he said something that stuck with me. "Ethan, you're a good man. You have potential." I don't know why, but I feel like we were meant to meet. I didn't fully understand the weight of his words at the time. I only knew that I'd met someone who saw something in me that I struggled to see in myself. What I didn't realize was that this chance encounter was the start of a relationship that would change my life forever. Over the next few months, I found myself visiting Mr. Harper regularly. It started with him calling me back to fix small things around the house, an old lamp, a wobbly chair, a finicky record player. But soon, those visits became less about repairs and more about companionship. Mr. Harper would invite me to sit in his study, a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the faint smell of tobacco lingering in the air. He'd pour us glasses of tea or sometimes whiskey, depending on his mood, and we'd talk for hours. At first, it was mostly him asking questions about me, my life, my goals, my struggles. But gradually, he started sharing pieces of his own story. He told me about his early years, growing up in a poor family not unlike mine. He'd worked his way up from nothing, starting as a laborer in a factory before stumbling upon an opportunity to invest in a fledgling construction business. That one decision, fueled by gut instinct and a bit of desperation, had set the foundation for his wealth. But despite his success, there was an undercurrent of sadness in his stories. He'd been married once, briefly, but the relationship had ended when his relentless pursuit of success consumed all his time and attention. "I thought money would solve everything," he said one evening, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. "But I learned too late that it doesn't fill the void." There was something profoundly humbling about hearing this man, someone who seemed to have everything, speak so candidly about his regrets. It made me realize that success wasn't just about what you achieved but also about what you lost along the way. As our bond grew, Mr. Harper started taking an active interest in my life. He'd ask about my repair business and offer advice on how to grow it. "You need to think bigger, Ethan," he'd say. "You're talented, but you're stuck playing small. Don't let fear or circumstance limit you." At his suggestion, I began looking into ways to expand my services, even dabbling in digital advertising to attract more clients. He even gave me a small loan to upgrade my tools, insisting it wasn't charity but an investment. "Consider it a test," he said with a sly grin. "Show me what you can do." But beyond his advice and generosity, what meant the most to me was his belief in me. For the first time in my life, someone outside of my mom saw potential in me that I hadn't fully recognized. It was a gift more valuable than anything money could buy. As time went on, our relationship began to feel less like a friendship and more like family. Mr. Harper became the father figure I'd never had, and I did my best to fill the void of loneliness that had haunted him for so many years. Little did I know, the bond we were building would become the cornerstone of a future I couldn't yet imagine. By the time I turned 26, my life had begun to shift in ways I never thought possible, thanks in large part to Mr. Harper. The repair business, once a small hustle to scrape by, had grown into something more substantial. With his guidance, I'd hired a couple of part-time employees, started offering specialized services, and even landed contracts with a few local businesses. For the first time, I felt like I was on the path to something real, something sustainable. Mr. Harper, however, always had a way of reminding me that success wasn't just about work. During one of our conversations, he said something that stuck with me: "Money's a tool, Ethan. It's not the goal. The goal is what you can build with it, your life, your legacy, the people you help along the way." He began teaching me things I never would have learned on my own. He walked me through the basics of investing, explained how to evaluate opportunities, and, perhaps most importantly, showed me how to think long-term. "Too many people focus on the quick wins," he'd say, leaning back in his leather chair. "But the real rewards come when you play the long game." On weekends, he'd invite me to his home for what he jokingly called lessons in living. Sometimes we'd spend hours discussing books on philosophy and economics, Other times he'd share stories from his younger years, offering nuggets of wisdom buried in tales of his triumphs and mistakes. One particular afternoon, we found ourselves walking through the sprawling garden behind his mansion. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the neatly trimmed hedges and blooming flowers. He stopped by a bench and motioned for me to sit. "You know," he said, gazing out at the horizon, "when I was your age, I thought wealth was about having more money, more power, more things. But the older I get, the more I realize it's about freedom. Freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, and what kind of mark you leave on the world." I nodded, trying to absorb the weight of his words. "I guess I've always seen money as a way out. A way to escape the struggle." "It is," he said with a small smile. "But don't let it become your prison. The moment you let money define you, you've lost." Those words hit me hard, especially as someone who'd spent most of my life dreaming of financial stability. But they also gave me a new perspective, one that stayed with me as I continued building my business and planning for the future. As the years passed, Mr. Harper's health began to decline. He moved a little slower, his once strong voice softened, and his hands trembled faintly when he lifted his glass. Despite this, his mind remained sharp, and his wisdom continued to flow freely. What I didn't realize was that time was slipping through our fingers, and the man who had become such a vital part of my life wouldn't be around forever. But for now, I was simply grateful for the lessons, the companionship, and the unexpected sense of family we had found in each other. By the time I turned 30, I had carved out a stable life for myself. The repair business had blossomed into a full-fledged operation, complete with a small team and a steady stream of clients. I'd even begun saving and investing, following the principles Mr. Harper had instilled in me. Life wasn't perfect, but for the first time, I felt secure. But even the best seasons of life have their shadows. Mr. Harper's health had been deteriorating steadily over the past couple of years. His once brisk walks around the garden turned into slow strolls, supported by a cane. Conversations that used to last for hours now often left him fatigued after just 30 minutes. Despite it all, he maintained his sharp wit and unwavering spirit. He never complained, but I could see the toll the years had taken. I'll never forget the last conversation we had. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and we were sitting in his study, surrounded by the books and artifacts that reflected a life well lived. He looked more fragile than ever, his skin pale and his hands trembling slightly as he sipped his tea. "Ethan," he said, his voice softer than usual but still laced with warmth. "You've done well for yourself. Better than I could have hoped. You've got the drive, the heart, and now the means to do something truly meaningful with your life." I didn't know how to respond. I was overwhelmed by a mix of gratitude and sadness. "I wouldn't be here without you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with something I hadn't seen before. "You've always had it in you, Ethan. All I did was show you the door, you're the one who walked through it." 2 weeks later, I got the call I'd been dreading. Mr. Harper had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news hit me like a freight train. I'd lost not just a mentor, but a father figure, a friend, and a guiding light. The grief was overwhelming, but alongside it was a deep sense of gratitude for the time we'd shared. The funeral was small and understated, just as he'd wanted. As I stood among the handful of people who'd come to pay their respects, I realized just how much he'd kept to himself. For someone with such wealth and influence, he had led a surprisingly quiet and private life. A week later, I received a call from Mr. Harper's lawyer, asking me to come to his office. I wasn't sure what to expect, but what I learned that day left me speechless. Mr. Harper had left everything, his fortune, his mansion, his investments, and even the business empire he had quietly maintained, to me. The lawyer handed me a sealed letter in Mr. Harper's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it and read. "Ethan. You became the family I never had. I leave these things to you not as a gift, but as a responsibility. Use them wisely, and remember the lessons we shared. Build something that matters, and don't ever forget the power of kindness and hard work. Yours always, Harper. Tears streamed down my face as I sat in that office, overwhelmed by the weight of what he'd entrusted to me. I hadn't just inherited wealth, I'd inherited his legacy. And with it came the most important decision of my life: how to honor the man who had believed in me when no one else had. In the weeks following the reading of Mr. Harper's will, my life turned upside down. The mansion, the investments, the accounts, it was all mine now. I went from living in a modest apartment and running a small business to managing an estate worth millions. It was surreal, to say the least. At first, I didn't know what to do with it all. The sheer magnitude of the responsibility weighed heavily on me. I spent hours sitting in the study of the mansion, surrounded by the remnants of Mr. Harper's life, trying to process what it all meant. His words from the letter echoed in my mind: "This isn't a gift, it's a responsibility." One of the first decisions I made was to hire a financial advisor and a lawyer to help me navigate the complexities of the inheritance. The investments were vast and diversified: stocks, bonds, real estate, even a few small businesses Mr. Harper had acquired over the years. It was clear that he had meticulously planned for this transition, leaving everything in pristine order. But the money, as overwhelming as it was, wasn't the most challenging part. It was the mansion. Living in it felt strange, almost like intruding on sacred ground. Every room was filled with memories of Mr. Harper: the study where we'd spent countless evenings talking, the garden where he'd shared his deepest philosophies, the grand dining room he never used because he preferred simple meals in the kitchen. I decided to take things slowly, focusing on honoring his legacy rather than making any drastic changes. I poured myself into learning about the businesses he had owned, meeting with their managers, and understanding the people who had worked for him. It was eye-opening to see the reach of his influence and the respect he had garnered. One of the businesses stood out: a community center he had secretly funded in a struggling part of the city. It provided job training, meals, and after-school programs for kids. I had no idea he was behind it, but finding out filled me with a profound sense of admiration. He'd never boasted about his philanthropy, choosing instead to quietly make an impact where it was needed most. Inspired by his example, I made the community center my first project. I expanded its programs, using part of the inheritance to create scholarships for kids and job opportunities for parents. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to channel my grief into something meaningful. As the days turned into weeks, I started to find my footing in this new reality. The mansion, once a daunting symbol of my responsibilities, began to feel like home. The wealth, once overwhelming, started to feel like a tool, a means to create change, to build something greater than myself. But even as I adjusted, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Harper's guidance was still with me, urging me to dream bigger, to do better, to carry his lessons forward. Little did I know, the decisions I was making now would set the stage for a future even I couldn't have imagined. As I settled into this new chapter of my life, I realized that merely preserving Mr. Harper's legacy wasn't enough. He had left me the resources to make a real difference, and I felt a profound obligation to do so. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that his true wealth hadn't been in his money or possessions, it had been in the lives he'd touched and the impact he'd made. I started by expanding my repair business into something much larger. Using the funds he'd left me, I opened a network of vocational training centers across the region. These centers offered free courses in practical skills like electronics repair, plumbing, and carpentry, fields where I'd once struggled to find work. The goal wasn't just to teach people skills but to give them the tools to build a better life, just as Mr. Harper had done for me. The community center he'd quietly funded became my flagship project. I funneled money into upgrading its facilities, adding a state-of-the-art library, and creating mentorship programs where professionals could guide young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I named the new wing of the center after Mr. Harper, a small way of ensuring his name would be remembered. Word about these initiatives spread quickly, and before long, people started reaching out to me, local leaders, nonprofits, and even former classmates who were now in positions of influence. They wanted to help, to collaborate, to be a part of the growing movement. It was humbling and a little overwhelming, but I embraced the momentum. Through all of this, I kept returning to Mr. Harper's teachings. His lessons about patience and playing the long game became the foundation of my decision-making. I didn't rush to spend or invest every dollar. Instead, I focused on sustainable projects that would have lasting impacts. One day, while sorting through some of Mr. Harper's belongings in the mansion, I stumbled upon a leather-bound journal tucked away in a drawer. Inside, I found pages filled with his thoughts, plans, and reflections. There were entries about his early struggles, his rise to wealth, and even notes about our conversations. One entry stood out to me. "I've learned that true success isn't measured by what you take but by what you leave behind. If I can leave this world a little better than I found it, then I've done my part." Those words became my guiding principle. They reminded me that this journey wasn't just about honoring him, it was about creating something that could outlive both of us. The projects grew, the impact widened, and slowly, the wealth I had inherited became more than just a fortune. It became a force for good, touching lives in ways I hadn't imagined possible. For the first time, I felt like I was living up to the potential Mr. Harper had always seen in me. And through it all, I couldn't help but feel that he was still with me, his quiet encouragement woven into every decision I made, every life I touched, and every dream I dared to pursue. Years passed, and the life I had built in Mr. Harper's memory became a testament to his faith in me. The vocational centers expanded across multiple states, offering thousands of people a path to financial independence. The community center grew into a nationally recognized nonprofit, inspiring similar initiatives in other cities. And the repair business, the humble seed of my journey, continued to thrive, now serving as a training ground for young entrepreneurs and technicians. Looking back, it was hard to believe how much had changed since that fateful day when I first knocked on Mr. Harper's door. The shy, struggling young man I'd been felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and deeply connected to a purpose larger than himself. One evening, as I stood in the garden of the mansion, my home now, I found myself reflecting on everything. The flowers were in full bloom, and the sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. It was the same spot where Mr. Harper had once told me that wealth was about freedom and the mark we leave on the world. He was right, of course. The money, the mansion, the businesses, they were just tools. What mattered most was how I had used them to create something meaningful. But as proud as I was of the impact we'd made, I knew there was still more to do. That night, I sat down in Mr. Harper's study, the leather chair he'd always favored now mine. I pulled out his old journal, the one I had discovered years ago, and added my own thoughts to its pages. I wrote about the journey we'd shared, the lessons he'd taught me, and the ways I had tried to honor him. At the bottom of the page, I left a simple note. "Thank you, Mr. Harper. I hope I've made you proud." In the years that followed, my work continued to grow, and so did the legacy we'd built together. But no matter how far I went or how much I accomplished, I always carried a piece of Mr. Harper with me, a quiet reminder of the man who had seen something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. And as the years rolled on, I realized that the true gift he had given me wasn't his money or his possessions. It was his belief in me, his lessons about life, and the unshakable conviction that no matter where you start, you can rise above it to make a difference. I wasn't just living my dream, I was living his too. Together, we had turned a chance meeting into a story of transformation, proving that sometimes, all it takes is one person to change your life forever.